City Council will come to order for a special City Council meeting on Wednesday, May 22nd, 2024 at 6 o'clock p.m. We'll start with roll call.
Brooke Brown.
Alec Robinson.
Kevin Glashey.
Phil McDuffie.
Sarah Hudson.
Gavin Maskill, being quorum present. We will move on to public comment on items not on the agenda. Do we have anyone wishing to testify on items not on the agenda?
I think he's for items on. Do you want to speak on an item on the agenda?
I want to speak on item 3.
The rezoning?
Okay. We will, then hearing none on items not on the agenda, we'll move off of public comment, move on to the regular agenda. We will call up agenda item number 2, discussion and possible action regarding an amendment to the city's code of ordinances, part 1, chapter 24, signs and advertising, and part 2, chapters 101, building and construction, 103, environmental protection and control, and 107, zoning related to aligning city's code with the recommendations of the city comprehensive plan with the commercial corridor and other matters in connection herewith. Ms. Wayman?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
I recommend we pull up 2 and 3 together.
So done. We will also pull up agenda item number 3. You could read it there for yourself. And with that, items 2 and 3 are before the council.
We do have someone who wants to speak on item 3.
If we want to start there, that's great. Come on up.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
members of the council, thank you for having me. I'm Gene Veit. I live at 5100 Rollingwood Drive, and my property is currently in the commercial corridor. In fact, it heads the list. I addressed the Planning and Zoning Commission 2 weeks ago and requested that my property be removed from the commercial corridor and be made into a residential property. It's been a residential property, and my wife and I have owned it for 30 years. It was residential for 10 years before that when it was built. It's taxed by Travis County as a residential, and it's viewed by real estate agents as part of the residential market in Rollingwood. I've asked some people who know more about commercial real estate than I, and they say that as a commercial property, it's not competitive from the standpoint of one particular attribute that any developer would want to have, and that's it's not visible from, and it doesn't have access to Bee Cave Drive, and that's a particularly strong negative from a commercial development to anyone who's interested in retail development of that property. There was some discussion with the Planning and Zoning Commission. They eventually made a recommendation to the City Council that they accept the rezoning of C1 and C2 into a combined commercial zoning district. And they also passed a recommendation that the property where I live would be made a residential property. I've not been able to find minutes for that meeting, and so I don't know whether that whether those recommendations have been passed on to you. But I would hope that you would consider that. That's my strong wish. Any questions? I'd be glad to answer.
Council, questions?
Could you give us the address again?
5100 Rollingwood Drive.
5100 Rollingwood. I'm sorry, I'm hard of hearing, and so you'll have to.
I just wanted to confirm I had the address correct, but it's 5100 Rollingwood Drive.
That's correct. Yes.
Do you know why it was zoned commercial in the first place?
Well, you know, if you look at a flat map, a two-dimensional map, it looks like that's the way it ought to be divided. But if you study the topography of the site, you realize it's problematic. When I bought the property, I knew it was commercial. I was told that by the real estate agent. But you know, it was a relatively new house. It was larger than most of the houses in Rollingwood then. And I couldn't have expanded its use because the backyard was the drainage field for septic. Some of you probably remember those days. Today, of course, it's not a new house. It's not large compared to what's being built here, and I'm connected to the sewer. So it's a property that has value because the backyard's quite large. I mean, I'm 100 by 150 feet. You could expand the house out, and you could still have a backyard for whatever recreational you wanna have back there. But I don't know why it was included in the commercial.
It's my understanding, and I might be wrong, but I believe that residential is a less intensive use than commercial and would always be allowed under commercial zoning, so that commercial zoning wouldn't hurt you at all.
Yes, that's an interesting point. I read through the recommendation for the commercial corridor, and someplace around the end of the, there's a paragraph that says non-conforming structures in the commercial zone. How did it read? I'm getting ahead of myself. Non-conforming structures in the commercial zone that are residences are grandfathered in, but they have to retain their use and their footprint. Can't be changed, can't be modified, which would be a hindrance to the value of that property. If you had a copy of the recommendations, I could probably find it for you.
Okay.
But that basically, I'm a non-conforming use.
Okay.
He's also on the north side of Bee Caves Road, which has currently a proposed limitation of 30 feet height and no more than 2 stories, which the residential properties do not have that same limitation.
I'm sorry, I didn't get all of that.
So the proposed changes to our commercial code for properties on the north side of Bee Caves is a limit of 30 feet in height and no more than 2 stories for commercial properties. But residential properties right now, we have 35 feet and no limit on the number of stories. So you would be more restricted if you stayed as a commercial
Yeah,
property.
I don't believe I could put a second floor on the house. That's correct.
No.
Anybody else?
Any other questions, council? I think, well, thank you for being here. I think from a process, I was just asking, I don't think that this is something that we can do within this posted agenda item. But let us look into it. And council, I'd ask if you're amenable to bringing this back and helping them out with this. I'm happy to put it on the agenda for us. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, before you
Go ahead.
go,
Sure.
There's another meeting next week. Is it more appropriate to discuss it next week?
Counselor, do you want to weigh in here on the process?
Sure. So it would have to go through the normal rezoning process, which means, the city could initiate it, or you could initiate it, but it would
Yes.
have to go through
Yes, I understand.
the standard rezoning process, which means planning
Tell
and
us
zoning.
the steps to, if we were to make this change, what steps do we have to go through?
The same steps for any type of rezoning, so a notification to, I think in our ordinance, every single property owner.
I think it'll be
250 feet.
Okay, so 250 feet, notice in the paper, public hearing at Planning and Zoning Commission, a written notice to people within 200 feet, public hearing at the Planning and Zoning Commission, notice in the newspaper for City Council, public hearing after recommendation from the P and Z, and then City Council can amend the zoning code.
Okay.
So who takes the next step?
So I will say at our P and Z meeting, they did on their motion move to initiate city-initiated rezoning. So we'll need to just double check in the ordinances if we need a separate item for anyone to do that. But our ordinances do say that the P and Z or the city council can initiate city-initiated rezoning. So I believe we can go back and make sure, but I believe we have what we need to go ahead and begin that rezoning process.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Mm-hmm.
I would just suggest that we get before we start that process, a nod of heads from this group to move forward, so that staff is doing so with direction from council.
And let me just clarify, if that's possible, then what we would have to do, if it's possible for the city to initiate that change, then we would have to give a mailed notice to residents within 250 feet. Then there's some period of time before, then a public hearing at P&Z. Do we have to have a public hearing at the council level as well?
We do.
Can we do that jointly?
You could have a joint meeting. It does say the city council has to make a motion to set that joint public hearing. And I have to defer to see if we are
It-
posted for that
Yeah, and
action
I
tonight.
also don't know, does our ordinance require, in order for city council to initiate the rezoning, does city council have to post that at a properly posted meeting and then make a motion to initiate it?
I would have to, let me look into this
It
specific.
honestly, it might be easier, and I'm sorry, sir, I don't remember your name, but if, it might be
Mr.
easier if he,
Fike, I
Mr.
believe.
Fike, if you, it might be easier if you just initiate it. If you just come down to City Hall and file an application for a rezoning, it's fairly simple, isn't it, that application process?
It is, I believe if the city initiated though, we could, waive any of the fees
I think you
involved,
could
which- or I guess
probably
we'd
do that
Probably do it either
anyway,
way.
yeah.
It sounds like it, yes.
And that might be the easiest way.
Yeah, and it does require a motion, so it says the city council or commission, which is the planning and zoning commission, may initiate, without payment or of application or petition fees, amendments or changes to the zoning regulations.
And I would be comfortable with that motion tonight, honestly, if that's something y'all wanted to do.
With the property is listed to be zoned as commercial. I think what we're saying is, if the city initiates it, we have to have we have to have it on an agenda before we can take that action. If you initiate it, you can come down to City Hall and initiate it, and it can go straight to, after the notice, it can go to planning and zoning. So that's what I understand.
Hasn't it already been initiated?
Thank you for that clarification.
That was my understanding.
No, the initiation was to go from whatever commercial zoning district he's currently in to the single commercial zoning district we now have.
No,
This is-
to
Yeah.
residential.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And-
When was that initiated?
hold on, I see the ships passing in the night. So I think, I think that it has been initiated by planning and
By
zoning.
P&Z, right.
And I think what Counselor's referencing is it's not posted that correctly for you all this evening,
Well,
but I don't think that was your question.
My question is,
I know.
do we even need to do anything? Because P&Z has already initiated it.
No, yes, because according to what was just read by Ms. Wayman, city council has to make the motion to initiate it. It's not good enough for P and Z to do
Or
it.
She said,
She
or
said the
commission.
opposite.
Oh, does it say or P and Z?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, then I
Yes, well,
apologize.
and the commission's motion was, and with the one recommendation to have city initiate residential zoning for
Yeah, it's
5100
good enough.
Rollingwood Drive. So if
I'm
we
good.
believe that they've done that, we can go ahead and start that process.
Yeah, I'm good.
If we would like there to be a joint public hearing, we may have to bring back an item to you all at your next meeting for you to schedule a joint public hearing, because to do the public hearings together. If not, we could have the P and Z public hearing and the council public hearing separately. Just adds a little extra time because there's a requirement for newspaper noticing before the city council public hearing. So we could try to wrap that all into one and bring back next week at y'all's special meeting an item to set a joint public hearing, if you would like that, similar to how we did for this.
Is there an urgency to do a joint?
That's kinda where I was.
Seems to
Yeah.
me that it's hard to get a
Mhm.
quorum of P&Z and city council for a special meeting, where it might be
Sure.
easier just to do the two separate meetings on their normal date, and then,
I think that's right. I think let's let P and Z knock their piece out, and then as soon as it's done, we'll bring it back to you guys for public hearing and then action.
That sounds
And
great. And to
I
your point,
think they also have a couple of other things they want to have a public hearing on too.
yes,
So
they do.
That may well make
So
sense.
to get back, there's really nothing more that you need to do right now.
Well, I kind of lost it in that back and forth.
That's
I'll
why.
have to get with the city administrator.
I was
Sort
I was
of.
trying to help you bottom line it there. I don't think there's anything you need to do, and I think we
Yep.
have what we need to do to keep it moving for you.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your attention to the issue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Now, you continue to have items 2 and 3 before you, and I'll recognize Ms. Brown to open up the items.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As was said earlier, the Planning and Zoning Commission has recommended approval of the proposed ordinance with a few changes, and we can walk through what those changed recommendations are. The other item, so that is one action for tonight, to get any comments that the council might have or requested changes to that draft. Then also we have approval of the zoning map to match what decisions are made with respect to the zoning ordinance. And then there's a resolution that would require that we state an intent to adopt dark sky community. So that's item number 4. So the things that are up for discussion now are the ordinance, the changes to the code, and the zoning approval of the official zoning map. I'm prepared to, I can walk through, what I thought might make sense is to walk through the draft page by page in sections, not actually page by page, but I have sensible groups of pages so that we, for example, would do page 1 through 8, all the miscellaneous sections, see if there are any changes there, then walk through topic by topic in page order and see what changes there are, and then see where we are at the end of that discussion. And if Mr. Mayor and council, if we can take a preliminary vote on those changes as we walk through, then by the next meeting, the meeting next week, we can have a final draft that will actually be in ordinance form with the changes to today's draft redlined, and be able to be prepared to vote on an ordinance. This is not yet quite in ordinance form, but so any changes we would make tonight would be put into a document that we could redline those changes so you can see them next week, and we can move on final adoption. If that's how you'd like to proceed. If you want to do if you want to do it another way, I'm happy to do it any way the council would like
That
to
sounds
do it.
like an efficient way to do it, so I'm for that.
All right, so if you're looking at the Exhibit A, Commercial Corridor Amendments Composite Draft Final 4/24/24, are there any changes to the miscellaneous sections, page 1 through 8? I don't know, Mr. Mayor, if you
And
wanted.
where are you?
In the document that's listed for this meeting, Exhibit A, Commercial Corridor Amendments, Composite Draft, Final 4/24/24.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And
I didn't have any.
the question is whether there are any changes or corrections to pages 1 through 8.
Anyone?
I didn't have any.
No.
Sounds like there are none.
Good. The next segment would be pages 8 through 16, and that would deal with the changes to the sign ordinance.
So sign, under design and construction standards, C1A, there's an and at the end of that, and then B is scratched out.
Lighting must be white in color.
Oh, there it is, okay.
Yeah.
Can we combine A and B into one thing, since
No, it just,
To-
all red and,
It kind of is hard to see.
yeah.
Right.
Okay.
To your point though, I mean, since there's an A and a B and there's an and, can't we just have one and not have an A and a B anymore?
Well, it's kind of two separate requirements. I thought that all of B was scratched out, which is, so
Well,
the
if you
and
have
didn't
an
make
and,
sense, but.
If you say and,
I
then.
know that. I said it looked like everything was scratched out
No,
on
I
B.
understand.
So that's why the and didn't make sense.
I understand. My point is getting rid of the A and the B and just have thing number one. And one sentence, or two sentences, one sentence.
It's kind of two separate requirements, right?
Not if you have an and. If you say and,
Well, you have to
You have to
comply
do
with.
both of them.
You have, right. It
okay,
makes it more clear that there are two things that you have to comply with. if
Okay.
you have A and B.
okay, okay.
Because it could be in accordance with the applicable UL specifications and requirements and be like a blue light or
Right.
a green light or.
Right. Okay, sorry, forget I said anything.
How about that?
Moving on.
So is there a change?
Is-
No.
Okay. And I do have one overarching, is Councilwoman, is your intent to keep all of these drawings in the draft?
For the
I'm-
lighting section, yes. I think in the section we're looking at now is 1 through 16, and it's got some blocks, but I don't think there's any.
It's also the signage.
Yeah, I mean, I just generally really discourage us from drawing in our ordinances.
Well, if you,
I don't know how to amend a drawing, and I don't draw well.
if you can define a shielded light in words better than the drawing,
Well, I don't
then
think you'd
I'm
have
ha-
to do that. I think you have, just like we do with our drainage criteria manual, you reference a manual in the code, and then you can just draw away in a reference manual.
if that's a formatting issue, then,
I mean,
I mean,
it's y'all's, it's your policy, but I
if we can address that when we get there,
yeah, I mean, I think that's it's a more of a,
yeah. I think that's the only section that has drawings.
And I did see a good definition of shielded light in Dripping Springs ordinances. Is that where I believe I saw it? If
And
you-
they have the drawings too.
Oh, they do?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So I think if there are there any other changes to 8 through 16?
Nope.
Then the next section is page 17 through 20, and these are site plan requirements.
anything in 17 through 20, council?
Basically, these are changing C1 and C2 to C.
On the temporary signs, the standards on page 15, B2, says no more than 3 banners may be displayed per establishment per calendar year.
What line, I'm sorry,
Page 15, line 491 and 492.
okay.
No more than 3 banners may be displayed per establishment per calendar year. Just wondering how we're gonna enforce that, and who's gonna keep track of how many signs they've had up.
I think our planner came up with this suggestion.
So currently, you have, like, all of the text in black is already in the code. The idea behind this is to make sure that people aren't abusing the banner rules and basically calling it a temporary banner in order to subvert the permanent sign requirements. I'm trying to remember, I think that there is still a permit required for these. So we can track it through permitting, and if I'm wrong and it's not tracked through permitting, then it's, we can deal with it on an enforcement basis, right, where we notice it and we're like, hey, you keep having these things up, we're logging it and going through that process. So it just helps kind of close that loophole so we don't get in that argument about, you know, that's a permanent sign, it's been up too long, and they say, no, it's temporary pursuant to your rules, I'm just taking it down and putting it back up kind of thing every 30 days. So,
Yeah, I'm not too worried about it. It would be one of those things, you don't know it until you notice it, but once you notice it, and I meant notice like
You can start enforcing.
visually notice it, and then you can start, yeah.
And the line 290 does say one banner is permitted at a time per establishment, so I don't know if we actually, is that a permit in the sense of a piece of paper, or is that permitted in the sense of an allowance? Allowed.
yeah, but I don't see any exemption from the permitting there. So I'm pretty sure it does, but I am happy to look and verify that for you.
Okay. Sounds like you're good.
I
Any,
think so.
okay. Any other changes through page 20?
Page 20. This is just more of a question about the code, like, just broader, like, existing properties, do they have to comply with all this stuff, or? I guess the signage stuff and like the temporary signs, that's when
We have a current sign ordinance, and it's not zoning, so Charlie, keep me honest here. It's not zoning, so this, as the city changes the sign ordinance, establishments would have to come into compliance.
Okay.
If it were a zoning change, then existing situations would be grandfathered. But there may be more detail to that.
Yeah, no, I think that's generally accurate. Did you follow that, Bryce?
Yes, and I believe that there's actually a section in the signs that talks about non-conforming signs later on that deals with that, and I believe that my recollection on it was that it reads very similar to non-conforming use stuff, where it's allowed until you touch it and make modifications, and at that point in time, you have to bring it into compliance.
Got it.
And putting that, and as opposed to if it was in the zoning code, it'd have to go through the zoning board of adjustment process, as opposed to being in the zoning code, having to go through the zoning board of adjustment process, et cetera, et cetera.
Gone. The next section is the provisions that deal with the C-zone. And starting at page 20, this section at line 681 to 689, you'll see that the two existing commercial zones are stricken and the new language, Commercial District C, is inserted. So we're starting now with the zoning changes that are associated with this draft. In page 21 is driveways. And if you have changes either to page 20 or 21, at page 22 we get into a longer section that's lighting, so that's why this is just a little two-page question.
Can you maybe just describe what the changes, I mean, there's a lot of text here, what's the big takeaway?
With respect to driveways, And Bryce, maybe you want to address that.
Sure. So the driveway piece was intended to capture some of the limitations of driveways requirement that we had in the commercial corridor objectives, policy objectives. And so what we've tried to do here is create cross-access requirements, shared driveway requirements in here, and also kind of back end with TxDOT, since at the end of the day, along Bee Cave Road, that's TxDOT roadway. So yeah, it's very limited control about allowances for driveways, because ultimately they'll go through TxDOT. A lot of this is going to align with what TxDOT looks to do, which is limit driveway accesses and encourage cross-access so folks and businesses next to each other share driveways.
This also in, starting at line 715, you'll see that it requires commercial property owners to allow for dedication of joint use and cross-lot access. So if we're looking to reduce the amount of space taken by parking in driveways, this was one of the things that we went a bit outside. The comprehensive plan encourages that. This mandates it. There's not a way to really encourage it without putting a little bit more pressure to mandate joint access. And so you'll see that what we're asking commercial property owners to do is to allow for joint use and enforcing that by means of directing for the cross easements to be issued for that purpose, basically.
Did we get any feedback from like the commercial
None.
property owners on that?
None.
And this is a pretty common requirement in a lot of cities where we have commercial property lined up on major roadways to help limit that, so I don't have to like literally leave a driveway and cut back to go to the next property over because they put a curb up or they had landscaping requirements that were trees or something like that. And it's really that intermingling. For the most part, it works out for everybody, and property owners, commercial property owners get it because it ends up being better traffic through their sites overall.
Yeah, I hate when I'm trying to cut through and then there's like, oh, I can't get through this line.
Yeah, you cut through like 2 parking lots and then you're like, oh look, here's a retaining wall that's like a foot or 2 tall. Like only they could easily grade that and I could just drive up it.
Yeah.
It's also beneficial for fire access and things like that, so that they're able to get between properties and get people moved through parking lots.
I can tell you as a commercial property developer, I require people to give cross-access easements when we sell them some land so the neighboring properties can all access, especially when you have limited curb cuts.
Right.
And the purpose of the easement is really solely to help ensure that it's there and they can't come back later and pull a permit to put a fence there, or, you know, get that bad neighbor syndrome and try to block it off, because we'll have the ability to say, yep, can't fence off that easement, can't do those things.
Okay. Everybody good through page 21? Okay. Page 22 to 25 are lighting regulations. These lighting regulations don't go as far as what is recommended by the Dark Sky International Model Code, which is about 25 pages of itself. But it does require that lighting be shielded, that it be focused downward, and has standards for protection of light trespass at the property line, and also for light that might be directed outward above the property line that would be obnoxious to a neighbor or distressful to a neighbor. So most of this, our lighting code had not been updated in quite some time. I think the major thing here is the requirement of the shielded light, and this applies as light fixture, as a property is redeveloped or as light fixtures are changed. So it doesn't require any current action by a property owner not in conformance, but if they were to upgrade their lighting, then they would be required to comply with these requirements. And on this section, we've had some comments from, you may also want to look at the two documents that are lighting ordinance markup, J. Fleming 417 and lighting ordinance markup, J. Fleming May 2. So J. Fleming, a member of Planning and Zoning, reviewed both of these ordinances, reviewed this section, and has provided two drafts of proposed changes. There, if you've looked at your packet, they're in red with Jerry's proposed changes hand marked on those 2 pages. The Planning and Zoning Commission was good with all of the edits recommended by Jerry. And I think we have comments from, Ashley, do you have the comments on this section? I had one comment to what Jerry has recommended. If you look at the page 25, lines 9 through lines 817 through 820, Jerry had recommended that those lines be stricken as not as vague and not in compliance with the current energy code. I think we can update to the current energy code, but I would recommend that we keep that language otherwise in this code, because it may address some situation that we've not addressed specifically here. Then there was a second, the other recommendation, I would recommend all of Jerry's changes with one further exception, and that is lines 801 and 802. All lighting shall be installed in a manner that directs or shields the light away from nearby dwellings. We have a situation, Jerry had recommended that be stricken. I'd recommend that we keep it. We have some situations where we have homes at or above levels of lighting in parking lots or across the street, lighting on multi-story buildings from across the street. And so if there's a situation where a light from a parking garage or a building across the street might be fine at the ground, at the property line, but is not fine halfway up the building because it shines directly into a residential area. So I recommend we would keep that language 801 to 802 to be able to address that situation.
Hey Brooke, on, right above that, under the section 4 that starts on 793.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your reference.
On 793, so number 4
Okay.
up above. Just curious why the limit for properties other than service stations is 0.25 foot candles, and the service station is 10. That's 40 times.
So I believe that's an existing piece of your code. Part of the lighting also is that we've recycled certain sections that are already existing and just updated sections. It's all in red because it's being moved from its current location to
Okay.
this spot, so it's more broadly applicable.
And there you're dealing with people getting out of their cars at night in an area where there may or may not be an attendant, and you wouldn't be able to pump gas and see the pump and see your credit card and all that necessarily at a 0.25 candle foot power. So we're just talking about the lights under the canopy, and they are under a canopy, so that's why that was treated differently.
Yeah, and it's not 10 feet at the property line, 10 candle feet at the property line, it's 10 candle feet around the pump islands, so those specific,
Okay.
the gassing location, not the edge of the property. It'll still be subject to the 0.25 at the property line.
Okay.
Yeah,
Just seemed a very big difference between the two, and I don't, my eyeballs, whatever, not calibrated to know what the difference in brightness is
Yeah,
between
and
those two, but it just seems like a big difference.
Part of my guess on this, since it's a carryover of an existing requirement, is it's actually an upper end limitation. so that I don't have excessively bright, like crazy daylight spotlighting on gas pumps, but it meets this as a maximum threshold.
Yeah, I mean, I have some comment. I mean, it is a wide range. I just don't have any context about like what does 10 look like? What is the gas station currently? Like, I don't know. Maybe
Sure, I can
maybe
give you
that's
context to at least what a candle foot is. So a candle foot is it's a unit of measurement, and it's based on the amount of light a candle gives 1 foot away.
Oh, yeah, what size candle and.
No,
what
no,
do you
correct.
know?
Again, that's why I said there's a specific measurement unit to it, but that's how it's based. Is
Right.
that amount of
That
luminescence?
still doesn't
Yeah.
give us a picture.
Yeah, I mean,
you
it'd be
know.
nice to be like, okay, typical
Doesn't
gas
sound like a
station
lot, though.
canopy
10
is
candles.
this number of candle feet. So then you know, like, okay, is this below what a typical gas station is? And it's probably less than
Well,
a Buc-ee's, I'm guessing. But
I'm assuming you didn't just make these numbers up yourself and that these are industry standards?
They come from your existing code. So this is
Okay.
what it is today in the
Alright.
code.
all right.
So
I
we're,
was-
we're updating the code, so that's
Yeah,
why I was just, is it still appropriate, right?
Well, it's
So-
just hard to see, like when you, like you said, when you copy and paste it over, you kind of lose the context
Well-
of what changed. But
One option we have is to note this and get the research for
Yeah.
the next meeting.
yeah, that's good.
So if our businesses are not allowed to operate after 10 o'clock at night, are they still allowed,
Gas station, 24 hours, I'm sure.
gas stations can, you can,
What is the question? I'm
Phil-
sorry?
I said, our businesses are not allowed to operate past 10 o'clock at night. And so I'm wondering if there is an exception for gas stations where you can fill up your car at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Self-serve.
I definitely know our gas station's open after 10 because I've stopped
Yeah.
after a council meeting before.
Okay.
But I don't know if anybody's inside.
There's
I
no
guess
one
No, I'm
in
sure
there.
no
there's
one
nobody
inside.
there.
It's just
I'm
the
sure there's
public.
nobody there.
Sure.
I just didn't know if if we had an exception for that
Mhm.
in our code.
I'm not aware of one. If I can.
I am not aware of that requirement at all. I mean, I'd say there's probably a bunch of other industry that's going to be like that. ATMs, anything that's kind of self-service automated
Mhm.
probably doesn't have those limitations. It's probably also a way that it can be interpreted, your code, that the establishment itself is closed, and that's just an accessory piece because the garage or the convenience store portion is closed at 10.
Okay, I can answer this
Kinda thing.
question.
Okay.
Page 39, lines 1355 to 1359. Retail establishments other than restaurants may not be open to the public between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. the following day. These restrictions do not apply to automated retail services, including but not limited to automated teller machines and gasoline pumps. Restaurants will be subject to the hours of operation set forth in the special use permit.
Okay, thank you.
And I believe that's existing language also.
Thank God.
It is.
It's just
Additionally-
underlined because it's moved.
A couple other things that came out of Mr. Fleming's edits, his amendment to line 815, the aggregate total of outdoor lighting on any property shall not exceed. He changed it from 25,000 to 100,000. We just wanted to note that 25,000 was existing in the code. We weren't sure where the that increase came from. He didn't necessarily give a reasoning for that, and so we just I don't know what the impact of that would be, and so that might be something we need to get further information from him on. And then additionally, and I think you might have already covered it, he noted line 821 and noted that the section that says varies in intensity or color conflicts with the IECC, and he recommends including, leaving that in, but including the words except as required by the IECC. Our recommendation actually would just be to remove that section that says varies in intensity or color, because we don't refer to any other international codes in this section, so just to remove that section that we have verified may conflict with the IECC as he's presented, so that would
And
be.
we don't have an answer on that yet?
This one we know. Bryce, can you explain that a little bit more, how that might actually conflict?
Sure. So we believe the varies in intensity and color has to do, I think, with some requirements that they have for auto dimming these days for a number of lighting sources, and so if I'm auto dimming, I'm clearly varying in intensity and color, or not color, but intensity. I don't think that's really needed because I think the intent of this section is like, hey, you can't have like flashing lights and things like that. You have enough other verb descriptors in there, I think, to be able to enforce without that, because if somebody is changing in intensity, I believe they're inherently blinking or flashing or flickering, and we can make that argument and say, yeah, you can't do that. You know, I think of, well, this will be an exempt item, but the Christmas tree lights, Christmas lights that kind of fade on and off, that would be a varying in intensity. Those are exempt from this provision, but
It's too bad.
that kind of thing.
So would the recommendation then be to strike varies in intensity or color?
Yep, and just leave
Yes.
it struck, so that we don't have that, you know, there's not a potential for conflict or somebody misinterpreting what the intent of this is.
So, you understand, is it clear what the recommendation is there?
No, Brooke, so between the 25,000 and 100,000, your recommendation would be to leave it at 25,000, is that
My recommendation is to get a recommendation
Oh.
from our planner
from Bryce?
on that.
So we can bring you back more information on what that difference is,
Or why Jerry recommended the
yeah, and why
increase.
Jerry recommended it. My general answer for most things lighting for y'all when it comes to intensities and things like that is, if it's not broken, you don't really have an issue yet, and we haven't had anybody who says, by golly, your lighting requirements are so restrictive that it's basically dark all the time.
That's kind of
Don't-
where I'm at.
You know, and so that level, but you know, if there's a reason for it, because that is a substantially larger amount of lumens, then we can follow up and bring that information back at the next
Yeah,
meeting.
I thought that was what I thought we would have that tonight, but we can come back next week with that, and I'll talk to Jerry too.
Well, if we are considering trying to adopt dark skies
Right.
criteria, it doesn't seem prudent to allow people to
Quadruple.
quadruple the amount of lighting on their property. It kind of is
Per
going the opposite direction.
We can do that.
We'll have an answer for you next week on that.
Sounds good.
Okay, so the question would be, is the council, are there any other changes or recommendations with respect to pages 22 to 25 or the two markups provided by Mr. Fleming?
I don't hear any.
Okay. All right, then the next section is page 26. This begins the section that it has very specific zoning changes, including on pages 26, purpose, maximum height of buildings on page 26, then to pages 27, the requirements for seeking an increase to impervious cover limits is what's been added at lines 906 to 908. And then on page 29, the setback requirements. So those are not a lot of, some pretty important concepts, but not a lot of pages involved. So that's why I grouped those together. So we're now looking at pages 26 through line 988 at the bottom of page 29. just briefly, at page 27, we've said for purposes of submitting a development plan, if you're gonna seek increases to the impervious cover requirement, you've got to submit the required documentation for those increases. Then to page 29 at line 963, this is the development plan. You've got to identify any impervious cover and design features proposed under sections 107-115, which are that's the section that allows an increase to the 50% impervious cover if you have certain design features in your plan. Then the minimum setbacks are what we've talked about a number of times to reduce the setback with respect to any residential district at 75 feet. With respect to a public street at 20 feet, unless under subsection C, a building can be closer than 30 feet from Rollingwood Drive, but no closer, may be closer, but no closer than 5 feet from a property line adjacent to Bee Caves Road if the property owner has been approved to implement a landscape plan in conformance with section 107-116D. So this gets the changes that have been recommended in the plan for the setbacks.
So what's the right-of-way distance on Bee Caves? I mean, what is the depth of the right-of-way from the curb to?
The property line,
Mhm.
I don't know, and it probably varies. For example, on some portions of Bee Caves Road, there's not even a shoulder. So there's probably no right-of-way beyond the pavement in that area. It's gonna vary.
I'm just envisioning a building being 5 feet from the street. That seems,
Still
Cars going
This-
60 miles an hour.
right away.
This is 5 feet from the property line.
well, right, that's what I'm saying. How big is the right-of-way? So you have the edge of the street, then you have the right-of-way, then you have the property line, right? So that's why I'm asking, how deep is the right-of-way? Because if what you're saying is there is no right-of-way, and the property line is right there, then 5 feet from the street is very close.
And you have
Imagine
to
there's a
have
right
the
of way, but not a
to do
usable
that,
right
you
of way.
have to have also the landscape buffer. And so the landscape buffer is between the property line adjacent to the right-of-way and any impervious cover on the lot, so that adds another requirement for that part of the property. But we have no survey that shows us for every property where the property line is in relation to the TxDOT right-of-way.
Well, I can tell you, I've seen lots of situations where there's no dedicated right-of-way, and your property line actually goes to the middle of the street. On some major commercial streets, I've seen that. And a lot of cities have a right-of-way dedication as part of the plating requirement, which I'm sure that we do. But we might want to define these setbacks as some distance from the pavement or from our codified right-of-way dedication requirement as opposed to existing right-of-way, which may or may not exist. Does that make sense?
I understand where you're going with that. So one of the things to think about, and I'm gonna go ahead and guess and just make an assumption that TxDOT, with all the work that has been done over the years on Bee Cave Road, their right-of-way department has sorted out that people's property lines don't end up in the middle of the road, because they would have already acquired that
Right.
or done eminent domain, et cetera. You know, I imagine, I'm sure that the right-of-way outside of the pavement varies. I don't know that there's necessarily any place except for maybe some pinch points with like drainage features, that the right-of-way gets really small adjacent to the pavement. TxDOT, when they come through, they're very aware of these things, and they'll have at least some amount of space. Could be 5 feet, could be 15 feet. It just depends as you go through that. The other item to think about on the setbacks is that that's the closest it can get to the property line. It can go further back, right? So it's got that basically 15 to 20 feet for where the front face of that building starts from the property line. I would think that most people looking at this who are going to invest money and build are going to be very cognizant of that. And the people who are going to utilize this are really utilizing the pedestrian orientation and trying to pick up that model as part of their development. And so they're going to set this appropriately so it feels safe, it feels comfortable as we have sidewalks going through there. Because otherwise, why am I pulling all of my building all the way out front? It's easier for me to program it in a different way to have parking in front.
That's a great point. It might be helpful for us as a city to have the TxDOT right-of-way map for reference. I don't know if I'm sure they have one. You know, you mentioned there's no survey, but we don't need a survey necessarily, especially if TxDOT has its own right-of-way already, I'm sure, surveyed and mapped.
Yeah, and we can check with the city engineer and see what records they have of different sections as well.
And I'm not trying to create
frame
work.
that.
Yeah.
Not
and
trying to
what-
create work, but it
Sure.
might be helpful to have.
And what we also know is that TxDOT can require that can change that right of way. Whatever it is that today can change.
That's true.
And we expect that will change along our segment of Bee Caves Road because it hasn't been designed yet.
Right, well,
You
that's
know,
why I thought
so-
that we've been talking for years about making changes to commercial quarters so that people are willing to donate right-of-way for the changes that they wanna make on Bee Caves, so that if we then say, now you can put the building up to 5 feet from the property line, and then there's no property to donate to the right-of-way because the building is right there. I just wanna make sure that
I
we're
think we
not-
may have an email with their 60% drawing, and I know that it has some right-of-way, or at least the right-of-way needs on it, so let us see if we may not be able to find it right now, but we have some correspondence with TxDOT where they're looking at that gap project, so we'll try to look at that.
Yeah, just wanna make sure we're not creating problems that we then can't.
Yeah. Well, and I think from the property owner's perspective, they're gonna have researched that as well, because they're not gonna want to
Is
have
there,
their building torn down.
is there a way to create a TxDOT sign off on that setback?
We
At
had-
the time
we
the
had-
plats are, at the time the permits are issued?
We had, we discussed that at some length, and it is Tom Farrell's recommendation that we not require that dedication, because we want the city in that negotiation, and that dedication can be tricky, based on his experience the first time through on Bee Caves Road. So that, he believes from the city standpoint, it's better to have the city involved in that negotiation than to mandate that the property owner negotiate it with TxDOT and dedicate it.
Well,
So that is the advice we've gotten.
from Tom. But here's the issue that I can just speak to my experience. I've got property that I've developed where TxDOT wanted right-of-way, and I had to dedicate that property to TxDOT as a condition of developing my property. I've got other property where I didn't develop the property, and TxDOT came to me and had to pay me millions of dollars to acquire the right-of-way because I didn't have any development plans. And so, and if I don't have a requirement to dedicate, and then I go ahead and, as somebody mentioned, build my building, and then TxDOT comes along and needs to condemn the building to tear it, to expand their right-of-way, they're gonna have to pay you for it, and they're gonna have to pay you for the land. I just think you're better off requiring a dedication rather than just building all that condemnation cost into the projects as they go later. And I'm speaking in general terms, but I'm sure the engineers can, or speak to that.
In my experience, every TxDOT office is different.
Okay.
Different TxDOT offices like certain things. In fact, I was just working in another city and said, "Hey, we're trying to get you. We know you're expanding this road. These people are platting. How much right of way do you want?" And we'll get that with the plat. And they said, "Oh, just do reservation." And I'm like, "But I can just get it for you right now. We'll donate it to you." "No, just have them do reservation. We'll acquire it later." Blew my mind.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, I don't know that TxDOT has the ability to force dedication. My general experience has been it's the city, and we do it through subdivision platting. I don't know
That's
if they're...
what I'm talking about doing.
Yeah.
To help TxDOT out and not create an obstacle to a development project for TxDOT.
Correct. I'm going to go ahead and maybe guess that quite a bit of the developed commercial property along Bee Cave Road is already platted. So unless we can create a need for them to have to replat or something like that, I don't know that there's an ability to require that dedication. I'll kind of look to Charlie if he's aware of anything, at least as a like, hey, you have to do it at this stage. One of the good parts also though is that in theory TxDOT's also going to be aware of all of these development plans because everybody's going to need driveway permits. You know, even if they're modifying things or utility permits, etc., to deal with TxDOT right away. So they're going to have to go through TxDOT for all of that. I don't know if any of that helps the conversation a little bit. I mean,
It
it's kind of
does,
a tricky
especially
one.
given that the tool that we would use to require dedication is platting, and the platting is unlikely to occur in the permit process. And so it's really, we don't have a good tool to compel dedication, it sounds like, anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that I think the city can do and utilize staff for is, as they complete their plans, is to flag those properties where dedication is needed. And if those properties start coming in for redevelopment, it's, hey, you know, you're going to need to do this, otherwise you're going to kind of throw money at yourself here, which doesn't really help you. Because it's to their advantage if they're developing in close succession with TxDOT's plans and acquisition. And staff can kind of help guide that conversation in any of those pinch points where it's a little tighter. And that may be a constructive way, because in my experience, most developers are going to say, well, yeah, I don't want to build something that's immediately not going to look the way I planned it in a year when TxDOT expands or finishes some project. And they're really willing. Don't know that they'll dedicate. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Or at least they can kind of reserve that so when TxDOT comes through and does acquisition, we're not hurting anything and we're still being compliant with the city's code at the end of the day.
So you don't think there's a problem with the way it's drafted? We should just go with it the way it is?
I would say that I mean, we haven't had a lot of commercial development or redevelopment pressures yet. I think it's a function of, you know, seeing how this works, seeing how TxDOT's plans come along, because I also know that they were planning to redo Bee Cave for decades and then finally are getting around to it. So maybe this moves forward in a timely fashion, maybe it doesn't. I just hate to see us hamstring, you know, property owners that may be interested in doing this for a plan that we have no idea exactly when it's going to come through. And again, maybe they've got enough momentum that it gets funded and gets started.
And it's hard to use something other than the property line to define the setback, because if the TxDOT right-of-way changes, the property line necessarily changes, because now it's TxDOT property and not the property owner. So from the other side, I think we do have to define the setback based on the property line, not the right-of-way. So, you know, if you're comfortable, you know, I think going to Sarah's point, I think the only way we could address that point would be to have a requirement that the building can be no closer than something greater than 5 feet from the property line. And I just don't know if we solved the problem doing it that way. Does that make sense, Sarah?
I just having it 5 feet from the street seems
Sounds very close.
very close.
Well, it is very close. The other thought is it will reduce the speed of traffic when you have buildings closer to the street. That was the overwhelming comments we got as we were working on this section. And so it does make it more retail oriented, slower traffic than
Well, you would
what
hope,
it is today.
you would hope that it reduces the speed,
Yes.
because if it doesn't,
Well, and if we have street trees in there, you know, this isn't that they can put the building there, they've also got to have trees along the sidewalk along the streets.
But you're gonna take more
So-
than 5 feet of space, so no one will ever get to 5 feet, I don't think, so. I mean, cause you need to, if you're gonna do landscaping, that's gonna take,
Well, or if you know, there's some, if you look, for example, are you familiar with Gusto Restaurant on Burnett Road? There's some restaurants on Burnett Road that have a patio with a covered patio that's next to the sidewalk. So the firm structure of the patio is closer to, you know, it's probably at 5 feet. But there are trees within the patio that makes it shady and isn't a building.
I see.
So,
And a covered front porch like that's gonna be considered part of the building, subject to that setback.
so I would say, if y'all want this to stay as it is, you want comment back, what would be the desire here?
I think it would be helpful to have some idea what the right-of-way is along there.
We'll see if we can't find that old communication that we had with TxDOT.
I didn't, I'm sorry, Sarah, I can't,
It would be helpful to know what, at least the range of right-of-way distances is.
Along Beacon Road.
Yes. Along
So
Beacon
you-
Road.
what are you measuring? From the property line to what?
To like back
To-
a curb.
To the back of the curb.
So the right of way, the greenbelt right of way width, what that generally looks like, right? Like what's the smallest sections and what are the biggest sections, kind of
Right.
thing. So you understand, like, oh, my smallest section's 6 feet, you know, versus 0 feet or something like that. And that's something we can probably get out, hopefully out of those plans. That plan set should probably have that.
Okay. And you're distinguishing right of way from, you're saying?
Property line. I think what Councilwoman Hudson's looking for is just that understanding of, okay, so if I build a building 5 feet off the property line, what's the reality of its distance to the street?
How
Or
close to
what's
the
that
curb is that?
range look like
Right.
based on what the existing right of way is?
Right.
Okay.
So, if we've got a plan set that's got at least
No,
some
we don't have
draws of that,
curbs
we
along-
can look at that.
Much of BK's
Or
Road,
edge of
Or
pavement.
edge of
the
pavement.
edge of pavement, okay.
I don't have any problem with the
So
way it's.
property line to edge of pavement, edge of pavement.
Yeah, we'll pull some numbers. We'll see what we can find and pull some numbers for you on that and kind of look at those tightest sections and the biggest sections. I mean, it should be pretty well identified because the areas where they need to acquire right away will be the small sections.
Yes.
I don't have any problem with the way it's written. I do think that is helpful information to have though, so.
Commercial
Right.
corridor is small enough. We can look at all of it.
Okay, anything else, through line 986? If not, the next section, describes the buffers between commercial and residential lots and includes the 75-foot, required green belt where that exists today. And that goes from page 29, line 989 to page, 31, line 1040. And buffers here includes the green belt, includes natural vegetation where there isn't a green belt between a commercial property and an abutting residential district. And if that doesn't exist, then there's some specifics about what that vegetative screen will look like. And then include some existing buffering requirements. So y'all good to go? Okay.
Have we gone to the parking spaces yet?
Then, if everybody's okay up through the top of page 31, then at line 1042 on page 31, this paragraph addresses parking. And Bryce may want to give us his point of view on this one as well.
Oh, I was just gonna jump ahead and say that the wonderful task force also recommended that they are comfortable with eliminating parking requirements from the code, in line with what Austin has done as well, since it's your biggest competitor for this stuff, and kind of letting the market sort that out as needed. So a lot of communities moving that way. Austin's one of the bigger ones that has done that. But that is a popular thing because I can tell you where the parking numbers originally come from, if that helps give context to why we have some of those numbers. They generally come from studies that have been done over the years, decades and decades of, hey, here's what people are requiring in different communities. This is what we think the needs are, and they are updated very rarely, very, very slowly. There's actually a big parking manual that the American Planning Association releases that I don't think has even been updated in a decade, that just has like land uses and then suggested ratios from various communities. So there's some rhyme and reason to it, but why is 200 feet for retail or 250 for retail or 300 for retail right? I'm not going to give you an answer to that other than, hey, if we've got a lot of one thing and the parking gets crazy, then the ratio starts going down. And then when people complain because they have too much parking lot, the ratio goes up, right? So I think that it's, my planning recommendation, I think that what's proposed here is much softer than the current code. So we've already halved a couple of these land uses in the parking requirements, which will help. The other piece that helps to this would be if you get away or get rid of parking requirements completely. Doesn't mean people are going to build buildings without parking, because it's just the commerce doesn't work that way, but they'll organize it and they'll build it in a way, in a number that works for what their needs are. So I don't think you'll have a lot of layout in a lot of areas, maybe the tail edge of Rollingwood Drive, where you would get spillover from that commercial into the neighborhood. I mean, I know we get some of that when ACL comes around, but that's a completely different issue. That's people like parking and riding, this kind of thing. I don't even know that you're gonna get people coming down Edge Grove to park on the first set of streets because it's still just too far to like comfortably walk. If anything, they'll park across the street at Trader Joe's in that parking lot, come across. But I think most of the people, as you're gonna see in Austin as this continues to develop, are gonna put in an appropriate number as we keep seeing just how transportation, how people move around shifts. And that's a constant thing that is happening a lot lately. Pandemic was a big start of that. So.
Do you not see problems when you have the crosscut traffic with one development deciding that they are gonna build theirs bigger and not having very many parking places, and then people end up parking at the parking next door because there's not enough parking there, so then the people that had their parking already now don't have enough parking?
It's always possible, and that same scenario likely would still exist under your current code. Certain businesses are just super popular. The example that I always like to use is like queuing requirements for drive-throughs. No, it's not a big problem that we have here, but a lot of cities have queuing requirements, works for 90% of drive-throughs until Starbucks comes. And Starbucks breaks all the rules because their queuing is humongous. I can't write a code just for Starbucks, right? So we kind of take it in stride. Do I want to penalize people? Do I just want to deal with these issues? At the end of the day, it's up to council. I mean, you bring up very valid points. We may have some of that. You may already be having that. A lot of people may also put up tow signs, or when it becomes a problem, et cetera, and it gets sorted out that way. The flip side to this that I will encourage, since a lot of this is, well, it's an attempt to update the code, but also look at, like, prepare for redevelopment and continued commercial development, is you have to compete with Austin. And so we've got impervious cover limitations. We do have some allowances for additional impervious cover. One of the biggest things that'll help businesses maximize their footprint is minimizing the parking. Especially when we look at, like, retail, for example, even with the existing ratio, which I believe was, in C2, 1 per 200 square feet, a 10 by 20 parking space, which is just slightly bigger than what we require currently, which I think is 9 by 18, that's 200 square feet. So every parking space that I have, I almost have 1-to-1 for floor area of retail. That seems a little crazy, right? I mean, yeah, that works when I got a jam-packed retail, but a lot of people who do retail these days don't do it packing the store with as much product as possible. It's, not necessarily a right or wrong answer. It's just something to try. You can always look at, what's proposed is better than what you currently have. It's more favorable for development. We don't think it'll cause any problems. You can start there, and then if you don't have any bites on redevelopment, you can look at pulling it all the way back. Kind of however you want to look at, slowly tiering that forward, or taking that plunge and saying, hey, we're going to be bold. So, but whatever y'all would like.
I can just see that being a potential issue. Is anybody, I don't know if anybody ever drives down Pecos. If I'm avoiding traffic on Mopac coming south, sometimes I get off at 35th and come down Pecos, right there across from Camp Mabry. There is a building there that used to be dry cleaner, and now it's a restaurant. Yeah, not much parking at all. And now there are cars parked on both sides of the street on Pecos for way down, because there's no place for people to park to get into the restaurant.
It's a popular place, I think, because I see it.
There's lots of cars there. Yeah, but that's the downside to not requiring enough parking spaces to serve the needs of that particular business, is that they start parking elsewhere. And you can't park on BK's Road, so.
Yeah. I mean, it encourages thinking about it, ride share. I mean, there pros, cons, absolutely, and it can be a problem. No doubt about that. I can't read the future or predict exactly how that'll shake out. So I would say if you want to be conservative in that regard,
Then
as
keep-
proposed,
Then keep it as proposed
Mhm.
and not eliminate it.
because the ratio adjustments in this are relatively minor.
Keep what the committee had recommended is to eliminate the required parking. But if you, the red line language doesn't do that.
Correct.
It maintains parking standards, so.
I would be in favor of eliminating them as recommended by the committee. That's the very strong trend going on nationally right now. And the point of trying to be competitive with Austin is significant. And businesses are gonna make decisions that are best for them for parking based on what their needs are and how it's gonna impact their ability to have customers. But problem with all the parking requirements is it has led to lower density development, and it encourages just more single automobile transportation. People could either Uber or ride together, or the businesses will work it out amongst themselves as to maybe you'll have a low, people that use parking at different times that are near each other. You see that in mixed use development with residential and commercial combined. But I think the less regulation we have on this, the better to be competitive.
Well, and I'm comfortable either way. If we find that we have complaints, there's options to eliminate the parking. And there's incentives, the paragraph C gives incentives, the kinds of incentives we want to grant reduced parking. The one thing I have also thought about is, if you know the property that's at 6th and Lamar, between 6th and 5th at Lamar, it's a Wildflower, it's retail in the bottom. It's across the street from Whole Foods, across Lamar from Whole Foods. There's retail in the bottom. The second level, it's actually 3 stories, but the second level is commercial. It's at the curb almost, it's at the sidewalk, but the parking lot behind it is 2-story in part. It's there's half flat and then there's a second story that's a half story of parking. And that, we could have that happen too on the north side of Bee Caves Road where the smaller properties are. So I think hitting the right level of flexibility is what's gonna get some developers interested in doing some creative design work along there. You also have, some of those, there's that stretch where Gusto's restaurant is on North Burnett Road, where there's retail at the curb, and there's parking behind those buildings. And there's parking, some side parking, that is, in my view, more attractive, particularly if you're pedestrian, so you don't have, this stretch in front of, for example, Chinatown, where it's just a lot of hot pavement. You have a smaller parking that are perpendicular to the roadway. So I'm happy to keep what's here. I think it's flexible if we think we need to still require some parking. If not, then I'm happy removing it.
I like the idea of going with the recommendations of the committee for one thing, but also businesses adapt with things like valet parking. And I know, I can tell you as a developer, one of the first things we would do in due diligence if we're looking at a site is say, how many square feet can we build here? That's what we want to know. And the answer is always, well, with landscape requirements, parking requirements, height restrictions, whatever, this is what you can get. And your go, no-go decision is really based on your square footage that you can build in almost every case. That's the first hurdle you have to overcome. And it makes your land more valuable if you have less parking requirements.
I just don't know where a valet park would park something when we're on Bee Caves Road.
There's
It
way.
could be a
It
church
might be.
parking lot or who knows what, but I mean, businesses are creative to solve these problems because it's in their best interest to have parking. And it depends, you have a restaurant that's only busy at night and you have other businesses that are only open and busy during the day. They can sort of work that out amongst themselves.
And it's hard to have mandated parking and also require shared parking. Because so that's another difficulty.
Is it legal to have, I think we have some right now that have signs in front on Bee Caves where it says, this parking space is reserved for
I think that's a landlord,
stoked signs
that's
or.
a landlord thing.
That's between tenants. That building is all, all of those buildings that have their, site-specific parking,
Right.
that's as between the tenants. The building owner's the one that would have to come up with how much parking is necessary at the time the building's built for all tenants. So that's a tenant-to-tenant thing.
But that is allowed so that if you had,
We don't enforce it. I think that
Okay.
the landlord would enforce it, be the one enforcing it. The city doesn't enforce it, the landlord would.
but if there was problems with poaching, if you will, of parking spots through a cut-through corridor or whatever, they could put
Yeah.
reserve signs up in front of, like, the business so that they can't come from next door
Yeah, just like
and
they,
fill up all their parking places.
just like they have now at the cleaners and the sign company next to it. They
Right.
have those
Yeah.
signs. There's nothing prohibiting that.
Okay.
Should we flag this next week?
I-
Do you want to see changes?
Sounded to me like everybody wants to keep it the way it is.
I think it's fine the way it is.
Ready to move on?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, page 32, there's only one section addressed here, and this is a sort of a capture provision so that when someone seeks to have a specific requirement stated in the code that for cafes, cafeterias, restaurants, a special use permit is required if they also want outside dining, separate and apart from the special use permit for the restaurant itself. So, any issues with that?
Good idea.
Then the next section is a pretty major section. The impervious cover section begins on page 33. And is the majority of that, continues to the line 1149 on page 34. So, this impervious cover section states the current requirement that impervious cover not exceed 50%. Then the major addition are the exceptions where that 50% could be increased. The first exception is it can be increased by 5% if, in addition to the existing drainage requirements, there's no increase in stormwater runoff either in volume or rate of flow. And I think that's directly out of the language in the comprehensive plan. The second
It's
exception.
both volume and rate of flow?
I beg your pardon?
It's both volume and rate of flow?
Yes.
Okay.
The second section, number 2, you could go from 50% to 60% if you meet the requirements of little 1I, little 2I, and little 3I. 1I is different kinds of runoff management techniques such as rainwater harvesting, green roofs, bioretention, so it doesn't increase any stormwater runoff either in volume or rate of flow. Number 2I is meet all TCEQ water quality best practices. And number 3, the site plan meets the design criteria in 10739, 107-109, and 107-116. And 107-116 is basically design and screening. 107-109 are the buffers between properties, and 107-39 is I had these written in my prior draft. The lighting requirements. And there's also the requirement in, if you have a plan under B, if you want to go up to the 60%, then you've got to, your drainage plan has to be certified by a professional engineer that the, meeting the criteria stated that section. And also, prior to the issuance, in D, prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy, there's got to be a certification by a registered engineer that the as-built design meets those criteria as well. So you're having a certification at the front end that the plan meets the criteria, and a certification as-built that the plan as-built meets the criteria. And then at the top of page 34, no variance may be issued to exceed the maximum impervious cover limitations of this section. So we're prohibiting there being a variance that would exceed, by which you could either get a change in the 50% based on criteria other than what have been outlined in the ordinance, or go above the 60% that's outlined without meeting those criteria.
And I have a question.
Yes.
Does the impervious cover rules, is that something that came out of the committee, the task force that's,
The 50% is the existing.
right?
The 55% and the 60% come out of the comprehensive plan as adopted. These were policies
Okay.
in the plan.
That's what I was wondering.
Yes.
I said the wrong words, but I meant the comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So did you give any thought, how would anyone ever meet that it wouldn't increase the stormwater runoff volume and rate of flow? Like rate of flow's an easy one, but how would anybody ever meet the requirement that no increase in volume?
They would have some form of, well, one example would be a green roof, so that would reduce the amount of water that leaves the site, or a bioretention that reduces the amount of water that leaves the site, or other, I think there's bioretention, that would be a tank. Those would be two methods.
Well, it could also be that the existing conditions are such that you don't really have any significant percolation. And so by putting impervious cover down over, for example, existing bedrock, you're not increasing any runoff. It's the same.
And, you know, these, the commercial area is adjacent to what has been a dry creek, and there probably are karst and other features that you could, you know, a little bit of drilling, you could show that you can retain it long enough for it to go back to the aquifer instead of going to the street. Not sure what the requirements are. Questions? All right, ready to move on? The next major section are compatibility standards. This has to do with screening of storage, screening of mechanical equipment, roof designs, screening of trash receptacles, and landscape buffers at the bottom of page 34. This would require a landscaping buffer along any public right-of-way between the lot line and adjacent to the right-of-way, and basically requires trees to be planted at a ratio of 1 tree per 25 linear feet. This is shaded sidewalks and shaded pathways. And so it, you know, today, if you look, for example, at Chinatown, the Chinatown there's a big expanse of grass, there's a couple of trees, there's a few shrubs, and the sidewalk is bare hot concrete. So this would require, it doesn't require shrubs, in that area between the building and the frontage along Bee Caves Road, but it would require trees. And if you look at some sections of, like the tail end of Bee Caves Road, near in Lakeway, you'll see that what's being done there is basic, and it's what's on along Trader Joe's on the other side of Bee Caves Road. There's not a lot of shrubs aren't required, but trees are required, and it's so that the sidewalk's shaded and usable. Then, if you do have parking, there's parking area landscaping, and it's basically trees, and for certain amounts of pavement where there is parking. Then there's a maintenance requirement, you know, requires a tree at least 12 feet high. That's the current, I think that's the current requirement where trees are required in the current code. And they've got to be there's a requirement to maintain the trees. An exception can be granted if approved by the building official, if the driveway is within a required landscape area. Then there is a prohibition on removing vegetation from the city's right-of-way. So this is the beautification section, basically. Any questions or changes? Ready to move on? Page 36, permitted uses. This is, what's been done here is to combine the uses that were permitted under the old C1 and C2 and make those permitted uses under the new C. So anything that could have been done under C1 or C2 can now be done on any commercial lot.
Okay. Can you, I'm having trouble understanding what A1 means.
What line, please?
1275.
I'm sorry?
1275?
Sure, I'm happy to address it.
Sure.
So this is an existing requirement that you already have for C1 and C2. What it means is that you allow the uses that are allowed in your residential district, with the exception of dwelling uses and subdivision sales offices. So there's some other things like churches, I believe, and a couple other items that are allowed in residential. So those are also allowed in this district, and that's a current item that's in C1 and C2.
Which means he's not allowed to have his house.
That's correct. It's existing non-conforming, and
I
that
was
kind
gonna
of
say
goes
that
in
earlier,
line
but
with
Yeah.
yes.
the request to rezone to residential is so that everything residential
Right.
that is currently built out there would then be legal and the same rights that everybody else has for residential property to be granted.
Okay. Well, that's the way I was reading that. I
Yep.
wanted to make sure that
And
that's.
that is the current code too.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, special uses, these are the special uses that are currently in the code, for either a C1 or C2. So they would be allowed in, any commercial district. Any C lot could do retail or could do these special uses, subject to, approval by the council.
So doctor's offices would be considered a professional office?
Where are you reading? I'm sorry.
Just two, we're talking about what's allowed, administrative, professional, and business offices? I mean, it's got a
Yes,
whole lot of
physician-
stuff like okay, there's
Physicians in there.
okay.
Physicians,
Okay.
veterinary service.
This hasn't changed.
Okay.
It's underlined because it got moved and combined.
Okay.
Looks good.
And the prohibited uses are the current prohibited uses as well.
Do we have anything in here that covers gym-type activities?
In prohibited uses or in,
Allowed uses?
uh,
I mean,
I
to me,
haven't,
there's a downside to listing everything that you allow, cause you're gonna
Yeah.
forget something.
Agreed.
Yeah, so in one of the pieces under prohibited uses, as you'll see at the leader of that, it's any use not listed in special uses and permitted uses is prohibited, and then it lists things including but not limited to, and has uses under prohibited as well. So anything that's not a specifically authorized use in the permitted uses or special uses is not permitted. So to your question, I don't see anything that would allow for like a gym or fitness center. So it would be a prohibited use.
Because we have some of those,
Right, so we need to add that.
right?
that's in a PUD. The
What's in
gym
a PUD?
beside the Trader Joe's is in a PUD.
Not all of them are in a PUD.
I'm sorry,
Not all of them are in a PUD.
where would be another gym?
Well, not a gym, but like an exercise facility and,
Mm.
yeah,
Got some really
Oh,
small ones these days too that just have
Right.
one or two machines in them. And
right.
just put it in there.
Yeah, I don't see any reason to exclude it.
Right.
We can add that in.
In a special use where you have to get a permit, or do you in an authorized use?
I'd just do authorized use.
So,
Yeah.
Can you bring back language on that?
Absolutely.
And you could keep it.
Good catch.
You could keep it vague too, just like a health and wellness.
Center?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, we've got physical therapy facilities, that's not really a
Like yoga and Pilates and all
physician,
kinds of, yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Anything else?
Should we move some of those special uses up to just permitted uses? I'll say that, hold on, wait.
Yeah, I
Like
don't really
camera-
see the
like-
distinction.
Like camera and photography supply store, do we really need to give a special use to a camera shop? Not that,
That seems like a retail use,
not that any
which
camera
supply
shop.
the everyday shopping needs of the residents of the
Yeah.
city, right?
Yeah, move that up.
Art and photography studios, like,
I'm sorry?
I was just looking at 17, art and photography. Some of these are clearly from the 90s. Facilities to assemble computers.
At least you didn't have video rental store.
Well, good
So
point,
you're already
yeah.
doing good.
Yeah.
Those still
Or my
exist.
favorite telegraph office, which still exists in some people's codes.
Facilities for assembling computer software products.
It's like Michael Dell out there in the back patio.
Assembling, okay.
Just leave that one in there because it's kind of funny.
Yeah, it's kind of quaint,
Yeah,
So
nostalgic.
we have,
exactly.
we have a prohibited use of veterinary service and kennel services, but we have allowed use for, where is it? For veterinary services. So how can we allow it and at the same time prohibit it?
And we have one.
You can fix them, but you can't keep them. It's a day
I'm not-
only.
Take it away.
Where, oh,
Number
prohibited,
7.
yeah.
So veterinary services
So
is
just-
on line 1279
So you could just,
in allowed uses.
Well,
you could just strike, and line 1339, you could just strike veterinarian services and leave
Yeah, kennel
Kennel.
services.
may I raise a question there?
Sure.
Is there, and I don't know if the veterinary clinic also has kennel services,
It
the
does
one that's
not.
already here?
There's a big discussion about that. It does
Okay.
not.
It does not?
Yeah, and that's something you would want to prohibit.
I think at least there's that
Go down to, like,
distinction
Down to P. Terry's.
with the kennel
Dogs barking
services,
on
so,
that.
Because they originally wanted one, remember? That didn't.
so would you keep veterinary services an allowed use, but keep veterinary kennel services a prohibited use?
Just,
Well, just not even veterinary services.
just kennel services.
Just prohibit kennel services and leave
Right.
veterinary services as acceptable.
Exactly. Yeah, but it doesn't want those dogs barking here.
Okay, any change other?
Were there some we wanted to move up to permitted uses? Do we wanna? Were there some that we wanted to move up from the special uses to permitted uses? Did we wanna make specific recommendations there?
What I have is camera, number 14, number 17, and 18 would move to allowed uses.
Okay.
Oh,
And gyms would move to allowed uses. And then prohibited uses, you'd strike kennel, strike veterinary services and.
Sounds good.
Anything else? Ready for trees?
Yep.
Are we scratching number 18 on the
No.
special use?
She's moving it up to allowed use.
What is that?
You know, computers.
Trident software.
Assembling
used to-
computer software projects?
Yeah,
That's
they,
a-
like they get them on disc, they put them in a box and like.
Who do you think makes floppy disks?
Perhaps that one just needs to be,
No,
because it
It's
just,
kind of fun to have in the code, I think.
we're updating for things that's like,
The computer guy down there thinks it's quaint.
It's the good nod to nostalgia.
no
Sell a
horse and
computer.
buggy
Yeah.
construction is
Oh,
allowed, you
I
know?
wanna take it out, take it out. It's
You
okay.
I
never
think
know where
there's
the
a-
future's gonna lead, you know.
If you change facilities to factories, I don't think we want that.
Well, you already have factories being prohibited.
Also, you didn't really move it up to the allowed uses, like you could have kept it in special.
It's in special.
It's
You
I thought you
get a
said you
permit
moved it
It's
up.
for
in
it.
special,
Yeah.
but it's just like,
It is super special.
what,
What's your desire?
I don't know.
Just leave it.
I don't know.
Leave it where it's at?
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
Is that an as is?
As is.
Okay.
So we'll move 14 and 17 up.
Yeah.
Alex writes software every now and
Okay, now at page 39, line 1360, this is the tree canopy ordinance. And if approved, this section would be moved. We've got it, we have a little glitch here. It's, as you see the title, it says tree canopy management within the commercial district. It's actually tree canopy management within all districts other than residential. We have a residential tree canopy ordinance. This will be a commercial tree canopy ordinance. The language in the comprehensive plan was more general for protection of trees throughout the city. If we don't apply this to government, church, and other PUDs, then we leave trees in those districts unprotected. So the recommendation of the committee would be to apply this section to everything other than residential. And I can cite you to what's in the comprehensive plan about that. The tree protection policy is actually in the general section of that plan, of the comprehensive plan. So more broad than just the commercial district. But that's a point to be considered, and I wanted to make sure that it's clear how the committee is recommending it be drafted.
Is this part of the task force, like recommendation?
Yeah, it comes from the commercial plan, but it is the task force recommendation. And we believe it appropriately implements what's in the plan. But we have it in the wrong, we need to put it, if it's approved and it's approved more broadly than the commercial section, we need to move it to a section that applies more generally than just the commercial section. Does that make sense? Am I?
Yeah. It'll get overlooked because the way that it's tiered right now, it's underneath the division for commercial district C. So if we want it to apply to all the non-residential districts, then we'll move it to Division 10 landscaping, and add it as subdivision 4 as written, and we'll update the title. So we can go with either the tree canopy management in all districts but residential, or non-residential tree canopy management. Either one I think will work
Was
for
there any,
purposes of titling.
like, specific discussion from the task force about, like, heritage trees and
Yes.
these?
I can walk through
Number.
that for you if you
Sure,
want.
sure.
This would protect trees of a protected species, same protected species as are in the current residential tree canopy ordinance. It would protect trees from a size of 12 inches in diameter or above. Pretty good sized tree. As my neighbor and Planning Zone Commissioner Mr. Fleming pointed out to me, he went around and measured trees. A tree of a 24-inch diameter is going to be a circumference of pi times the diameter. 3.144444 forever times the diameter. So a 12-inch tree is going to have a 36-inch circumference. So it's a pretty big tree there that begins to have protection. And then a heritage tree is a tree of a diameter of 24 inches or greater, or within a cluster of trees, multi-stemmed tree, which most of the red oaks are, 3 trees within a certain, I think it's within located less than 10 feet apart, having a combined total diameter of 24 inches or more. So you might have 3 12-inch stems connected by a root ball,
Yep.
and that would be a heritage tree because it's a cluster.
Where's that cluster language in here?
It's line 1376 to 1377. And this says, as drafted, it's 3 or more. My recommendation, and I went back to verify this last week, what the majority of the cities we surveyed on heritage tree sizes, most of them say a multi-trunk tree, a cluster of 2 or more trees, less than 10 feet apart, having a 24-inch diameter. And I've got some of those in my yard. Instead of you could have
Less than 10 feet apart, having a combined total.
2 big trees in the same root ball, and one be not protected in the same 3 trees in a root ball, and it would. So I think you'd want to say two or more trees there. But the notion is that, and it's more stringent than the current residential code. Trees 8 inches in diameter and above would have to be shown on the plan, on a tree survey before any development work is done. Trees 12 inches or greater, before removal, you would have to get a variance. The variance for the 12 to 24 inch tree is a lesser standard than the variance for a heritage tree. A heritage tree basically could not be removed except on a finding that the property would not otherwise be able to be developed. And so that's the greater protection than exists for under the current residential code. If you drive down Bee Caves Road and look at the existing trees that might be classified as heritage trees, there's a fair number of them. Most of them are within what is a landscaped area already. There's one that's in the front yard of the veterinary building that's a heritage tree, and that would be a situation where, potentially a variance would be requested to remove that tree. However, it's a really, really nice tree. It shades the sidewalk. So what we've also done here, which we saw in one of the other cities, is to give a credit against the street trees where you protected a tree of 12 inches or greater. And so you would get more than 1-for-1 credit for protecting existing trees that are 12 inches or greater. So that's kind of the other side of it. We've given incentives for protecting trees against other landscaping requirements.
Is there an allowance for a relocation of a heritage tree?
No, you would have to meet the variance requirements for removal, because there's a tree like that takes more than 100 years to get to the size it is.
No, I meant just moving
That tree,
that tree.
no.
Might be something to look at.
It'll die.
I looked at moving some trees up in Liberty Hill about 2 years ago that were big trees like that. The cost was staggering, and still the odds of it dying are like
Yeah.
50%, so.
How many did they move at the Capitol? They moved a lot.
The Waller Creek Conservancy, when they did the Waller Creek upgrade, from 12th to 15th to 12th or so, they saved their heritage trees and moved them, but it's like $100,000 or more. So I just don't think it would have been practical.
Probably not practical on our scale.
I'm sorry.
I said it's probably not practical on our scale. When they
Yeah.
built the underground office at the Capitol, they moved a lot of trees that were on the
I bet
Capitol
they did.
property.
Yeah.
So they could do the construction and then they
Mhm.
put them back.
And so that's why we put the credit language in there, and there's to help mitigate and if you look to the language. The language for removing a tree that's between 12 inches and 24 inches is on page 41, line 1443. So you can remove that size tree, and this applies to heritage also, if it's dead, diseased, or dying, as certified by a city arborist, or upon a special exception for the 12 to 24, that all reasonable efforts have been made to avoid removing the tree. The location precludes all reasonable access or all reasonable use. and it's not based on a condition or method chosen by the applicant to develop the property. So
Yeah,
that's the plan.
I guess, my initial thought is like, if we want people to redevelop, if that's one of the purposes of doing this, it seems like it's potentially makes the property like where it can't be developed. If there were like a big heritage tree like right in the middle of the lot, I don't know if that's really the case on any of the existing, lots that we have, so maybe it doesn't really even affect that, but that's sort of what I was
The,
gonna question.
the sense, and I would encourage you to drive, make your own judgment on this, but I did drive both sides several times of Big Caves Road looking at the trees. And because the parking lots are so big, there can be, we have some sizable trees in parking lots, but I don't think this is gonna be a make or break deal for any property, with that one exception of the tree at the veterinary clinic.
That's the one I noticed too.
And I also did a trip to Wimberley, and their retail area, there are a lot of creative ways to build around a heritage tree. There's some pictures that Wimberley Retail District shows some pictures of various heritage trees there, that I think it'll, if we want something that doesn't look like every other retail parking lot, then it will do us well to save big, nice trees.
People can be creative if they need to be.
Yes,
If it's easy to take the tree out, it's way easier just to take it out.
yeah. We can encourage them to be creative, and that's what we tried to do.
I have a question, one other question, like, in terms of like competitiveness, like, what is, like, City of Austin, like, what is their code? Does anyone know what that looks like for their commercial?
I have answers. This part of it was,
You want me to do something similar?
yes. They protect trees 24 inches or more in diameter, as does Bee Cave, Westlake, Wimberley, Dripping Springs, Sunset Valley, and Lakeway. I believe it's Sunset. I believe it's Dripping Springs that has the credit provision. Dripping Springs or Wimberley. But most of them have, those cities all have protection, require variances or special exceptions for removal of trees 24 inches or greater. Some smaller. Westlake, it's 14 inches. Dripping Springs, 8 inches or greater in diameter. So we're not out of the ballpark. This isn't extreme. It's,
I think it's reasonable. Some things can't be replaced. I looked up my quote for tree removing for a 43-inch oak that was 3 years ago, and it was $150,000. They claim 95% survival rate, but where are you gonna put it? It's like, if you have a property that's got that nice of a tree, can't we just leave some things alone?
and you know it going in.
Yeah, exactly.
You know it going in. All right, anything, have we, any more questions on this? Ready to move on? Okay. The next, section, now we get to more miscellaneous. Pages 44, 45, 46, we're removing, the prior, C1 uses because we've put them in the new C district. On page 47, parking adjustment for storage and warehouse areas, that's in part of the existing code, and we're just amending it not to apply to the new C district. Landscaping, this maintains the existing, on page 48, this maintains the existing landscape requirements for zones other than residential district and commercial district. So we're just maintaining, we're doing the edits necessary to maintain it for zones other than commercial, because we put new regulations in the commercial district. Then on page 49, this is a provision beginning at 1744 that protects the vegetation within the FEMA floodplain. This is existing language that came from, with a little bit of modification. We've defined that floodplain. It's not really defined in our current code. It just says 75-foot green belt. So we've defined where there is FEMA floodplain outside the 75-foot green belt, then this would preclude trimming and clear cutting of vegetation. The changes on page 50 regarding variances, that language has moved, so we're taking out where it is currently. D1, that's, again, we're just taking out what was reference to C1 and C2 and replacing it with the new C district. On page 52, we're now into special uses, the actual process for granting a special use, and we've added language that cafeterias, restaurants, and bakeries require a special use permit, which is what is required today. Then on the next change is on page 54, having to do with penalties for violations. And this is language that we've made changes here at the suggestion of our city attorney so that we make more uniform the enforcement provisions that have been scattered throughout the different pieces of the zoning code. Is that a good way to describe that, Charlie? And this section 107442 will apply to any violation of any provision of the zoning code or any permit. So that's a new sort of very general enforcement authority and mirrors state law, basically. Then on page 55, we've created a new special exception. This is a substantive change, and it's not exactly what was requested in what was policy in the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan had a provision that would allow any existing commercial building to be rebuilt on the same footprint. You could tear down the entire building, rebuild it on the same footprint if there was no expansion of the non-conforming use. On advice of council, it was recommended that instead of doing that as an exception to the non-conforming use provisions, that we do it as a special exception and tie the granting of a permit for redevelopment for those properties that don't have an existing 100-foot green belt that's getting reduced to 75-foot, that we have this provision in the code so that those currently non-conforming properties could, if they meet these requirements, could be granted a special exception to the new 75-foot green belt. So basically, this would apply to properties at the triangle end of Rollingwood Drive and Bee Caves Road, because those are the properties that don't have the existing 75-foot green belt today. And it would apply to the Palisades building, so that, and here's from the vantage point of adjoining residents, the committee saw this as preferable because it sets out what would be expected in those situations. It sets out the buffering requirements between those properties and the adjoining commercial properties where there's not an existing green belt as a buffer. So it's we think it's a better legally and better to know upfront what would be required for those residential properties that adjoin those non-conforming current commercial properties could expect if they were to be redeveloped. And those requirements are the ones, these are the findings at beginning at line 1975 that the Board of Adjustment would have to make. They continue on to the next page. There's 5 findings that the Board of Adjustment would have to make before granting a permit for redevelopment for those properties. Unless they chose to put in 75 feet of green belt.
The one on the,
Where-
either one, yeah, I don't think either one of those would be able to do that, but.
Maybe the Palisades,
Maybe,
but
but-
maybe not.
Yeah. But the
So
other one
that
that's-
was the change. It's, if you look at the comprehensive plan, it has the language about letting someone tear down a non-conforming building. Today, you can only change it to a degree of 50% and rebuild on the same footprint. So that's the proposal. Any changes or questions? We are done
With that part.
with that part.
So Councilwoman, is it okay, back to that question I had about the drawings, is it okay if we pull the drawings out and replace the language with, like, we'll keep the drawings in a side manual? And bring
Okay.
it back, so,
I mean, it's okay with me.
okay. We'll call it the commercial lighting and sign manual.
Yeah.
And then we'll
When I went, most of the codes have some kind of set of drawings.
it just gives
But
me,
if it's somewhere to be found, that's good.
just gives me the heebie-jeebies, so.
We were alerted that this issue might arise.
Yeah, I could tell you.
Mayor,
were.
if I may, one of the ones you may want to keep is the one that we've added for signs as it relates to measurement.
Yeah, we're gonna keep it all in there, and we're gonna keep it in a
Okay.
little side thing.
'Cause I was gonna say, I have had so many, I've spent so much time like dealing with people who want signs and arguing about how they're measured.
Yeah.
That like the picture is worth 1,000 words.
Yes.
Like,
No,
hey, it's
yeah.
measured this way. This is what the text says. There's no negotiating
Yeah,
because
you're-
there's the picture.
You're gonna have the opportunity to put the manual together, so it'll be
Yeah,
great.
absolutely. Sounds great.
So
Okay.
the other piece of business is if there are any changes or corrections to the zoning map.
Okay, and that's under item 3 that is.
It's
in-
part of 3, yes.
That is in front of you, yes.
Other than Mr. Fight.
So take a look at that, council.
So there is a little tail on the church property that doesn't have any color on it. What is that?
I've actually noticed that before.
I think what that is that the PUD is where it's, I guess salmon colored, but the PUD itself did not include that neck as part of the PUD. The PUD owner only PUDed part of it.
The church is a PUD?
It's in that PUD.
Well, I take that back then, yeah.
Oh, is it? Oh, you're
That
right.
is government.
That's the church.
Where is that on the existing map?
It looks like that's where, it looks like it was Delana Lane, kind of like old right of way, and we have that same thing that happens over by South
No.
Chris, the gray.
That's not what I'm talking about.
Oh, okay.
On the frontage of BK, on
Well, the front one.
where Barton Springs comes up,
Yeah.
it's right there by the exit from Mopac,
I
attached
see
to
what
the
you're talking
church.
She's talking about
That
Yeah,
one,
it's like,
okay.
oh,
The
And
little
it's,
bit.
it's.
That is the way it is under the existing,
But what is it? I mean, I know what the property is, but what's it zoned?
you'll have to go back. I wasn't here.
I don't know.
so,
I
Let
feel
us-
like, I feel
yeah.
like we should figure out what
Yeah,
that is.
let us see if we can
and-
figure that. We'll try to figure that out. I
and
don't
give
know
it a
what it's
color.
on. And give it a color.
I mean, the thing, what you were talking about, Ashley, is the Delana Lane, whatever, and that's the undeveloped street right away. The
Yeah.
little gray there and down by Gavin's house.
Yeah.
I mean, we have some additional that's also not got
Yeah,
anything in
that's,
front
that's
too.
shown, that, on the current, zoning, well, it's shown on this one too. It's the gray between the salmon and the yellow.
Yeah.
Nope, that's not what I'm talking about.
No,
That's Delana Lane.
Right.
That's
Right.
not what I'm talking
she's
about.
talking about, if you look at the brown dashed line.
Yes, I know the neck
Okay.
on the other side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just saying, it's not shown as zoned on the other side either.
Let me ask you,
On the existing map either.
we'll see if we can't find what that's attached to and who owns it. And then, do you have a preference on what to zone it as?
Well, I think we'd have to
Kinda depends
have
on who owns it.
we-
Yeah, let's try to figure
I mean,
that out.
if the church owns it, then we just,
Yeah, just,
Make
you
it
know,
say-
Fill it
make
in.
it salmon, but if it's not the church, then
Nikki, we'll get with you and see if we can't do some research on that.
it's kind of a weird shape.
It
to
is
be
an odd-
Sticking out like that.
I did go over this zoning map back when Ms. Kaler was here, but I don't remember
Yeah.
that little piece of it.
I know we did some research on this, I just can't remember how it
Okay.
happened.
Other than that,
But
I don't see.
if we do zone it, I think we have to go through a full zoning process, wouldn't we? If it's
Well,
unzoned
It
currently.
Right.
If it's unzoned,
Just
it may be.
feel like we
just
need
a
to
typo on
figure
the-
out what it is.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
the official zoning map defines the zones, so,
Right, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
depending on if the church owns that, it may already,
Be zoned.
it may be zoned correctly, we just don't have it on the map.
Just have color.
well, if that's the case, the zoning map, yeah, we can correct it with adoption of this zoning map, I guess,
Right.
the new zoning map. But under the code, the zoning map defines the zones,
All right,
so that's my caution there.
got it.
Which is my point. It seems like we have that little piece that doesn't have any zoning indicated, so we need to figure out what it's supposed to be and then
Make it official.
color it that way on the map.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, that is all I have. The next step would be to bring this back to you with the changes we've talked about today at next week's meeting, and I guess I don't think we can we officially adopt it, Charlie, at next week's meeting?
I think so.
We've gone through all the process, yes, ma'am.
So it'll be back in ordinance form, and maybe a separate exhibit that shows where the red lines were compared to today's copy.
Absolutely, we can put together a final, and then the red line that shows those changes from today that ended in the final, just so everybody knows exactly where those shifts were.
Yeah,
Not a problem at all.
Okay,
thank you.
thank you, Councilwoman. With that, we will move off of agenda item number 2 and agenda item number 3, taking no action. Move
Uh,
on. And move on to agenda item number 4, discussion and possible action on a resolution affirming the city's intent to become certified as a dark sky community by the International Dark Sky Association as part of the International Dark Sky Places program. Mr.
Sure.
Cox, you want to explain?
I
this one?
will. So, in order for the city to regulate lighting inside of the city, because of state law changes, right, we can't regulate building materials directly or indirectly, so on and so forth. There's some exceptions. One of the exceptions listed in Government Code 3000 is that the city can regulate lighting so long as they're either a recognized dark skies community or have passed a resolution stating their intent to become a dark skies community. So the resolution that we have before you is just that. It's very simple, clean cut, to the point, which is, hey, we're interested at some point in time in becoming a dark skies community. So,
So to be clear, this is a check the box opportunity. It does not, I would have some hesitation to go the full distance at this time until there's ample community input to apply it to the, because this would apply to everything. So I think that's been discussed in the past, and I think this lets you move forward with your commercial rewrite that you want to do, but I think we would need a more robust discussion before we went the full route.
And I would say that we're not going as, we would not be able to get certified as a dark skies community with what we have in the proposed ordinance. The dark skies community group would not, would have additional requirements. But in order to do anything with respect to regulation of the lighting, state law now requires us to adopt this resolution.
So it is moving in that direction, but not quite there. So
Yeah.
Well, and also I know our comprehensive residential code review is studying some lighting proposed changes, and for us to even consider them, as I understand what you said, we have to pass this resolution.
okay.
And I believe that this needs to be passed before the text amendment or the zoning amendment.
that would be
correct?
ideal.
Yes.
Okay.
If we could adopt this tonight,
This
that
could
would
be
be.
adopted. today?
I move to adopt the resolution for intent to become a dark skies community.
Second.
You have a motion by Ms. Brown, a second by Ms. Hudson. Is there discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Being 5 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Thank you, and thank you, Bryce, for being here tonight. With that, we will move on to agenda item number 5, discussion and possible action to authorize the mayor in coordination with the MOPAC South Expansion Task Force to determine acceptable project evaluation criteria for the city of Rollingwood and communicate those criteria to CTRMA and others and report back to the city council. Okay. We put this one on here after our last meeting because it became apparent that there was a path forward that we probably needed to avail ourselves of related to having interaction with CTRMA and making sure that some of our, not just the comments that we've made in letters past, but we need to probably mold those into more appropriate suggested criteria for evaluation of the actual projects. And so we want to, but we've already been to 3 of the technical working group meetings. They are riveting if anyone wants to go. We did 2 today. We did utilities and air quality today. And we on those 2 particular ones, actually we had some input for the utility ones. They had missed one of our utility tie-ins, but it's important for us to be able to communicate some of our suggested criteria in those work group meetings. And so we'd like to work with task force, work with Amy Patillo. She's got great thoughts on this, as she expressed in our last council meeting. So we'll come up with those based on our previous letters, so that we can communicate that with CTRMA over the course of these technical work group meetings, which are happening in the next week and a half. So
Can we, Amy had a whole list of the criteria that they had come up with already, which we didn't see in writing. And there were a lot, and she was reading through them pretty fast. And would it be possible for you to send out what that list is so we can take a look at? Because one of them that she ran through was something, encouraging, commute times or whatever from way out.
Right.
But what they're talking about is gonna screw up our commute times. So,
So, yeah.
something to the effect of, we don't really need to be making it easier for all of them to get where they're going and make it way worse for us to get where
And
we're
so
going, so.
we made basically that point today, after the technical work group meeting and just some casual conversation. And that is precisely the type of criteria that we're talking about, because one of the stated goals of the project as a whole is to, I forgot the exact language that we had.
Something for road, all users.
It talks about all users, right? But the focus is north-south MOPAC. And so we want to say, the type of criteria that we would be suggesting is to say, all users, including all users who are tying into the MOPAC, into the project. So it's exactly that type of wordsmithing that it's not rolling off the tongue right now, but it's what we want to try to craft and then have available, so that when we go to the technical work group meetings, we can say, hey, we think that this type of criteria also needs to be amended to the criteria that you're already looking at.
And how would that be coordinated with the task force?
We're gonna email, Ashley's been emailing them all week about these technical work group meetings, so we would put that together, share it back and forth, and then,
Get their comments
Yeah, get
before
their
you would
comments.
send it on?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but if you could send that to us so we can look at it. and-
we will, we're actually kind of looking for that still. We have some things that were in one of the presentations they gave us today, but we don't know if it's all inclusive of all of their criteria, so yes, but
Well, Amy had a list.
she did, but we're not sure where. We have that list, but we're trying to make sure that's the all-inclusive list, yeah.
And I've been trying to get all the emails and everything put together. I'll do one big update of the website that we have, that MOPAC South website, and do a full update now that we've started these technical working groups, and I'll share the link once that's done. My hope is to get that done by the weekend, so that way it's all in one central place. I know right now it's in multiple emails and presentations that CTRMA has put up.
And I don't think we have the website information about the task force together with the MOPAC South project. So
Wait, say that again?
I don't think, I don't think we have, what the website says about the MOPAC South task force is not on the same page as the MOPAC South webpage.
Okay.
Okay, we'll take a look
Yeah.
at that, yeah.
But I think they're engaged and interested, and so I would hope that you would coordinate with them.
Yeah, and we've invited them to all the technical work group meetings too.
And some of them have attended, but also on the comment side of it too.
Yes, oh yeah, yeah,
Get their input before you finalize the comments.
for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay, if you're okay with that, just give me authority to work with them in a motion, it'll be great.
He said moved, so moved.
You have a motion by Mr. You have a motion by Mr. McDuffie, a second by Mr. Glasheen. Discussion, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Being 5 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Thank you, council. And with that, motion to adjourn.
So moved.